Okay, so good morning. I am Iqbal Goriwal, Technical Support Manager here at CADPoint. Thank you for joining us today for this live webinar, the top 10 tips for Autodesk AEC Collection, getting started with automating tasks in Revit using Dynamo. That was a mouthful. So to give you some background about us, CADPoint is based in Crowthorne, Berkshire, and is a gold partner for Autodesk software. We have a team of experts ready to assist you in all aspects of design. We're also partners with some of the most trusted hardware manufacturers in the industry, including HP, NVIDIA, etc. As well as software, our team can also offer introductory training for new customers and advanced courses for experienced users to help you get more from the software. So without further ado, I know you guys are keen to learn about Dynamo. I'm going to move you on to Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Iqbal, and again, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. I hope everybody is keeping safe and well in the current situation. So my name is Jonathan Reinhardt, and I'm going to present the Getting Started with Automating Tasks in Revit. So just a bit of my background, I've trained as an architectural technologist and worked as an architectural technologist for about 15 years. I've also worked as a BIM manager and studied a master's degree in BIM management, working across UK, Ireland, and in Australia as well. And now my role is as a technical consultant, particularly looking at BIM workflows and BIM processes and the use of Autodesk software within those processes as well. So just to give a bit of an introduction to essentially give the context of what Dynamo is. So Dynamo is a type of visual programming. There are other solutions of visual programming out there, and Dynamo is just one of them. So essentially what visual programming is, it's a set of instructions that you give to something, and it turns it into a graphical representation of those instructions. And that's what Dynamo is. It's the graphical representation of a set of instructions. You can see here on the left-hand side, it's to make an origami swan, for example. And you can see you might have a list of textual instructions, and that's the way you need to think about Dynamo. How would you instruct somebody maybe in a textual format or in a verbal format? You know, perhaps it's like if you think of an IKEA piece of furniture, you have a set of instructions, and that's then transferred into actually enabling to put something together. And that, again, that's the way to think about Dynamo. And then Dynamo is the visual representation of that textual information or instructional information that you're putting into it. So we can see here, just on the top of the screen in the black box, we have what are known as nodes, and this is an example, very basic example Dynamo script. And in the bottom left, we've a couple of lines of code. We've got 6 lines of code, and the lines of code at the bottom, they do exactly what you see in the top Dynamo nodes. So you don't need to know the code at the bottom, you just need to understand how the information will flow through the nodes. So if you were to code using Dynamo or using Design Script or Python, you would use something similar to the below instructions at the left. So that's just to show you the discernment between coding and between visual programming. They both do the same thing, but they just appear differently. And visual programming is just a bit more of a tangible way for almost non-programmers to be able to program. So we can see this example, essentially what this is doing is creating a very basic command, but you can imagine how you could use this to manipulate geometry or even further manipulate types of information within Excel. So you've got a series of different instructions. So we can see points number 1, that's actually creating a point by coordinate within your Dynamo environment. And this is also replicated in your Revit environment as well. And I'll show that in the examples I go through. That information then flows through something called geometry distance 2. And this is just a very basic example to show you how you would create a circle and just the different steps that are involved in creating that circle. So within that circle, you're going to need a radius, you need a center point, and you actually need your surface to be created over that as well for this particular script. And as part of this script, we've got inputs coming from the left, and that information is flowing through all of those nodes on the right. So that's it, again, at a very basic format. You can use Dynamo to create geometry by performing scripts like that, or even getting more complex, such as creating structural elements that would traditionally be created or modeled in Revit or in your BIM software. That can take a lot of time. If you've got, for example, this example on the bottom left is quite an organic shaped roof. and you know, it kind of varies. The steel size varies, or the steel width and height varies as the roof moves. But using something like Dynamo, you can actually automate the creation of all of those beams just by running one simple script. All you need to do is essentially define the height and select the top of your foundations. And this has actually, the roof was created first, the roof surface just as a single surface. And then the beam structure was created just by selecting the roof structure. So that's just how you can get really complex with Dynamo. But today's focus is about getting started with Dynamo and how you can start to do very practical workflows, such as putting information into Excel, creating basic types of geometry in Revit. And the basic, or the foundation knowledge is what we hope to deliver you today, that you're able to take that away and even watch back the recording of this particular webinar. And within the next kind of 3 minutes, I'm going to cover top 10 tips that I believe will help you get started using Dynamo, mainly focusing on architectural projects, but there's also other snippets in there, even if you're engineering or construction as well. So keep watching for that. So I'm just before, obviously, I'll keep a few minutes at the end for questions. I'm just going to jump into the demonstration that I've actually recorded here. And these are the top 10 tips as well. So the first tip to get you started with Dynamo, it's good to understand at first that Dynamo is installed with all the latest versions of Revit. It is an open source software, so it's free. You don't need to purchase or anything. There is Dynamo Studio, which is separate. But just to understand that you find it under your Manage tab, and just at the end on the right hand side, you'll find something called Dynamo. So when you click on that, it will pop open a dark kind of user interface similar to this. You can see it floats over the top of Revit. And this user interface, I'm in Dynamo, but it knows that I'm linked into this particular project automatically just because I opened it. And that would be the same if I had another project open in the background. If I had a second project here and I clicked into that tab, it would know that I'm connected to that project. Therefore, anything I create within this Dynamo space will have an influence on the project if that's the type of script that you're executing. And further on the user interface, within the Dynamo environment, you'll find on your left-hand side is where your nodes are stored. So this is essentially your node library. This is where you'll find the proprietary nodes that come installed with Dynamo, but you'll also find your third-party nodes here if you decide to use third-party nodes. There are a lot of them out there. We won't go into them today, but just be aware that when you install third-party packages, they will appear under here under add-ons. So in the left-hand side here, you have your node library. You can manually click on each one and find what each node does. When you right-click on a node, a little message box pops out and it tells you what it does. When you click on that particular node, it will appear in your environment, and you can right-click on that, click Help, and it will actually bring you into a bit more information regarding what the actual node does in itself. So you can also search for nodes in the search bar. So if I wanted to do something with Excel, for example, I could search for Excel and I can see import Excel. So that's one way of using the user interface, and then also being able to search in the node library as well. And you can also manually search within there as well by clicking. So the second tip that we're going to cover today is just touching on what the actual nodes do. So what Dynamo does, it takes information that you give into the nodes and it changes that information in a certain type of way. So in order to create a script, it's made up of a series of nodes. So these are nodes here that we see on the screen in the gray boxes, and they all have different types of functions. So the example here I'm going to show you is just using something called the list nodes. Now there are a lot of list nodes. So what list nodes allow you to do, it allows you to manipulate information from Revit in order to put it into either a different format or use it in a different way that Revit doesn't necessarily allow you to use it. So I'm just going to use a basic example here, just with some numbers, not in the Revit environment. We're just going to look at what list nodes do to a certain piece of information. So on the left-hand side here, I've put in some number nodes. So what these contain essentially numbers. These could also be coordinates, they could be measurements, floor areas, quantity numbers, or any sort of information that you've taken from a Revit model, but I'm going to keep it simple for now. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to use something called the list create node. You can ignore all of this on the right hand side. So the list create node, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull all of these separate numbers together and put them together into one list. Very simple. So I'm just keeping this example simple just to explain the principle of it. So when I connect those in, you can see the top turns to a dark gray. That means that the node has actually performed its function and you've satisfied all of its requirements. So if I hover down to the bottom right, I actually see the result of this particular list. So that has taken all of these individual and separate numbers and put them into a separate list. So I'm just going to turn this off to manual from automatic. So that's put them into a separate list. So again, this could be parametric information, it could be measurement information or any sort of numerical information, or even it could be text information. You just have a text node put in here. So in further to take that information and say you want to manipulate it in some way, we can also use something called a list cycle node. So what a list cycle node will do, it will ask me for an input of a list. So I know this is my list on the left hand side here. List is the output of this node and list is the input of this particular node. So because I can see that it's light gray, that means that I have not satisfied all the inputs, and the reason for that is because the amount one is still empty. If I hover over this, it says amount, and in the bottom left it says int for integer. So it takes a number or a programming term for a number. So I'm going to call that 7, and what this is going to do, it's going to actually create a cycle of these numbers 7 times. So it's taken 5, 20, and 7, and you can see it's created a list of all of those numbers. So 5, 20, and 7, 5, 20, and 7. And I can see at the bottom, I can just confirm that I know that there's 3 numbers going into this list, and it's completing a cycle of it 7 times, and 7 by 3 is 21. So if I change that to 5, obviously it's going to change to 15, and it will create 15 items of each of those lists. So say another couple of nodes that I want to manipulate list information with could be a list first item. So say, for example, you have a list of coordinates in here, and you only want to take the first coordinate, the last coordinate for whatever reason. You could use something called the list first item. So I can push that node in there. So the list first item is going to take the 5 out of this list, hit run on that, drop that down, it only gives me a 5. And then if I put in list last item, this particular node, it will only take the last number of that node. So I just hit run and it's going to give me a 7 as a result here. And I can see I've got a 5 and a 7. And I'm able to then just pull those numbers together in a list create node, click run on that, and you've simply just pulled out the 2 separate numbers from this particular list. So that's just one very basic way to understand how list works. And obviously you will be doing this with more complex information, construction information or design information, but just to understand the principle of those different types of list nodes. So to find the list nodes, you just on the left hand side, and you've got a list of different types of nodes under here that you're able to use. So it's good for you to get familiar with the different types of list manipulation that you're able to do with your Dynamo data. The next tip I want to give you today is to show you how to target specific parametric information based on text values within your Revit project. So on the left hand side here, we can see we've got a floor plan created, very basic floor plan, just of 4 walls and 2 rooms, a plant room and a storeroom. So within our Revit project, we know that if we select our room tag, for example, we can see we've got a series of parametric information here on the left-hand side. Now, while it's not always possible to manipulate information from one set of parameters to another set of parameters within Revit, you are able to cross-match or bring in different types of parametric information into Dynamo and maybe push that out to Excel or some other type of CSV format, perhaps. So one of the parameters that I'm going to show you here is something called element.getParameterValueByName, and it does exactly what it says in the thing. And just to right click on this again, it gets the value of one of the elements parameters. So it's going to fetch the room parameters. I'll show you how I actually target the room parameters itself. So what it takes an input, Revit elements.element, and that's just taking the room elements. This is taking in then the actual parameter name that I want to target. So this parameter name is exactly what I see here on the left hand side. So if I wanted to pull in the area or the perimeter, I would then create within this property box here, I would create one of those parameters from the left hand side and put it in exactly as it is written in there. It is case sensitive, so just to be aware of that. So in this case, I've targeted something called the name parameter of the rooms, and I've targeted the area parameter of the rooms. So when I hit run on both of these, you can see that these are both of the nodes, and there are inputs. I won't go into that just at the moment. And when I hit run on this, it actually brings it into an Excel file, but we can see here that it's actually bringing that information. It's targeting the plant and the store, and it's pulling in those two room names, and it's pulling in the actual areas because I'm also targeting the areas of these particular room tags. So if I click on this storeroom tag, I can see the area is 55.8. That's my result here. And the same if I was to click on the plant room, it is also 34.2. So you can see that's 34.2 as well. If I was to then change this particular parameter that I want to target, so if I want to say, for example, if I want to target the number, I will just type in here, number, N-U-M-B-E, or make sure it's the same case as it's spelled here. Just click away in that in your space, hit run again, and I can see it's bringing in the numbers of those rooms. So number 1 and number 2, this is number 2, the store, and this is number 1 here. So that's just one way of targeting the parameter values by name. The next example I want to show you here, or the next tip I want to show you, is about using selection nodes within Dynamo. So in the left-hand side here, you can see under your library, if you go to Revit and then go to selection, there's a series of different selection tools. So essentially what selection tools allow you to do is select something within your Revit environment. So on the left-hand side, we've got all elements at level. So that will capture all of the elements at a certain level. You give it a certain level, all elements of a category. So all of your rooms or all of your furniture. And there's a lot of different selection nodes here as well. There's also categories that you can just input, rooms or a family category that is all selected at the same time. So the example I'm going to show you here now is something called Select Edge. And what this is actually going to allow me to do, it's going to allow me to select these two particular walls in here. So we can see we've got a curved wall and we've got a kind of angled wall here. While I have my Dynamo environment open on the right-hand side and my Revit open on the left-hand side, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to select the different edges of these walls. So simply by using the select edge, I'm just going to select on the top one, I'm going to select that line there, and I'm going to select the bottom one as well. I'll show you the purpose of these. So I want to capture those two lines. So say I, for example, wanted to connect beams across walls, I would use something like the select edge node. And when you actually use a select edge, it actually gives you the element ID of that particular element that you have selected. So that's the Revit ID of the particular object or family that you have actually selected that, and the same for this one as well. So what that's done, it's actually captured those two lines, and it's going to allow me to then manipulate that information in a further way depending what I want to do with it. The fifth thing that I'm going to show you today, or the fifth tip that I'm going to show you, is using this same script, but I'm actually going to show you how you would use these selection edge nodes in order to create a set of beams between these two walls. So within this particular script, this script actually takes two wall edges or wall locations and will connect beams across them, even though they're at two different heights, so or two different shapes, as you can see, curve, and we've got an angle. And you can imagine if you were to model that in Revit, there's a bit of manual work involved, and obviously if it's a more complex roof or a larger project, you're going to have a lot more modeling involved in that as well. So what this is going to allow me to do is actually select the type of beam that I want to connect between those two walls. It's going to tell me, I can tell it what level I want those beams to be placed at, and it's going to ask for a certain amount of information. So the node that uses this or creates these types of beams is something called the structural framing beam by curve. So if I search here on the right hand side, I'm just going to search for beam by curve. So I can see under the structural framing, and I'll just show you the library here. So under, if I scroll to the top of this, it's under Revit, under Elements, and you can see there's a lot in the library. So if you get more familiar with searching, it just becomes a bit easier. So I can create something called a beam by curve. And you might say, what's a curve? So a curve is essentially a line between 2 points. And it's a programming term essentially. And you become familiar with things such as curves and that type of terminology that is used in Dynamo. So it looks for an input, it looks for a curve, it looks for a level, and it looks for a structural framing type. And the output is the actual structural framing, and these are just some other nodes that create the actual geometry. So in order to input a curve, I need to have the two lines that form the edges of these walls, and that is why I use the select edge nodes within there as well. And all I've done is I fed those two edge lines into something called a curve by point at parameter, That just gives me a point along the line, and then I have to create a line by a start point to end point, and then I just use this node, structural framing beam by curve. So I'm going to hit run on this particular node now, on this particular script, and you can see here on the left hand side that has created a set of beams, and you can see they're all angled and rotated to each end of the wall. So imagine if you create a compact roof, it becomes very beneficial in terms of time efficiency as well, being able to do that. I also have a number slider connected in here. So I've defined that I want 8 beams across that particular wall. If I want less beams, 6 or 7, I can then hit run on that, and it's only going to create 6 beams. If I then go up to, maybe 11 beams, then it's going to create 11 beams all the way across that. So all it's doing is dividing that line essentially, and the main node that we're using here is the structural framing beam by curve. So the 6th tip I want to show you here today is about bringing information from your Revit project into Excel, for example. And there's a node in Dynamo called data.export_Excel. And the way you find that is, again, go into your library, just type in Excel, and you've got data export and data import that you can both use. So what we're going to use here is the data export Excel, and we're going to go back to the earlier example of the 2 rooms, and just to show you how you would get that information into an Excel file, for example. So again, we're using what we saw a moment ago in the name tag and the area tag of those particular rooms. So what we've actually used here, we've captured all of the categories. So if I was to drop down the categories node, for example, I can select all of the walls, and I can target all of the walls and any of the parameters using that get parameter value by name if I want. But for this example, we're just going to target all of the rooms. So I'm just going to go back down to rooms, make sure that's engaged. When I hit run on this, it's going to do, as we saw earlier, capture the name and the area, but it's going to put them into a list, and then it's going to populate them into an Excel sheet. So this particular Dynamo node, data.export Excel, it requires an input, a file path, so you need to tell it where the actual, so in this case, mine is actually on my desktop, so I've selected a particular Excel file that's on my desktop. It looks for something called a string. For a sheet name. So the sheet name is actually your sheet in Excel, and by default it's sheet 1, for example. It also looks for a number, your start row within Excel. It looks for a start column within Excel, so A, B, or C. And in this case, because it's Dynamo, it requires you to put a number in instead of the letter. And then we've used something called a list create node, which we saw at the start as well. And that just brings that information together, and it's pushing that information in there. So when I hit run on this, I can now open up my Excel file, Dynamo Room Data, on my desktop. Open up my Excel file, and I can see that actual information has been populated in there. And you can see it's actually gone slightly over to the right. And the reason for that is because we've chosen the start row as being at number 1. So start row is being at number 1. So this is your second row is actually number 1. In programming terms, it uses indexing, so your first item is always 0. So if we want to go in the first row, for example, 0, and our first column, press 0, hit run again, and we can see that that's actually moved up to there. So you can imagine if you start adding more rooms into this particular project. So I'm going to add another room, place another room tag. I'm not going to name it, just going to hit run on that. So just an error came up there just to say that we couldn't overwrite that particular file. So all I did was direct it to a new file. Just when I hit run on that again, no file selected. This is my particular file, and it's populated the additional room down here as well. So you can imagine if you have a complete list of information, you may have quantification or finishing information that you can also pull in from your Revit model on this side as well. You can start to create quite usable Excel information that you can use on your design projects. The next tip I'm going to show you is actually how to use Dynamo Player. So you can see Dynamo Player resides here in the Manage tab as well. I'm just going to click on it. So what Dynamo Player allows you to do, it gives you an interface just to almost hit play on scripts that exist in the background. So this is quite useful for maybe people that don't know how to use Dynamo but are able to use scripts in a design office, and the scripts are maybe created by one person or multiple people, and then non-Dynamo users can use Dynamo Player just to engage those particular scripts. So for example, all you have to do is direct to where your particular Dynamo scripts reside. And in this example, I've only put them on my desktop. So you could locate this to a central server, and you may only have read access to that server, therefore it's protecting your Dynamo scripts. So I've directed that to my desktop. I've got two scripts here. I've got something called create Revit walls. I've got another one called Revit to Excel room data, and that was the previous script that we just saw. So all I have to do, when I hit play on this, it's automatically going to capture all of this room data. So hit play on this, it will automatically open the Excel file and add in any information that it finds from within here as well. So that's Dynamo Player. It can also be used to create geometry as well, or even to pull different types of information. So using Dynamo Player is very useful in your Revit workflows. The next node I want to show you here is something called level by elevation and name. And what this actually does, it actually creates levels from an Excel file or information that you input into it. So if I right click on it, create a Revit level given its elevation and name in the project. So where it pulls this information from is actually from an Excel spreadsheet. So we can see here on the left hand side, we've got the name of all of our levels that will be created in our project, and we've got the elevations in millimeters that they will be based on. So this information could be pulled, for example, from your BIM execution plan, or even from surveyor's information, or from a structural engineer's information in a central location, but you're pulling it from an Excel file. So what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to feed this information from Excel through a series of nodes. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to have to direct where that information is read from. So this particular file path node is directing to an Excel file. It's pulling in that information. I'm telling it that I want the levels information. So it's using a data import to Excel file, not export. And it's, if I drop down this, I can see the results. It's pulling in all of that particular information and all the different elevation levels there as well. It's pulling in, I'm telling it to pull the first item, which is actually the heading of it, and we saw that in the first example. It's pulling the heading, name and elevation. It's creating the Revit levels. It's getting items at index, and that will make sense after you run this script. And then it's actually creating the levels at the end. So you can watch the recording of this video and pause and play it back just to follow this particular script. It's a very handy script and very easy to run. So as soon as I press run on this, you can now see within your Revit project, all of these levels have been created, individual selectable levels as taken from the Excel file that we inputted in here. If I was to add in additional levels, run the script again, it's then going to create those levels again. So you can imagine if you have a complex project, identifying all your levels early on in the project can really add that efficiency. The next tip I want to show you here today is how to actually create wall geometry based on coordinate information that you've inputted into a Dynamo script. So we can see here we're going to use a node called wall.byCurveByHeight, and it's similar to the beam creation node. So if I right click on this, it creates a Revit wall from a guiding curve, so from a line by the height, the level and the wall. So the inputs that it needs a curve, so it needs a set of lines which I've given coordinates. It needs a height, 3 meters, it needs a level, and it needs the type of wall. So these walls are actually the walls that are loaded into my Revit project on the left-hand side, and it will only load in the walls that you have loaded into your Revit project. So it intelligently knows that it's linked. I've used the list create node as well, and I've used something called a line by start point to end point, point by coordinates. So I've actually given a point by coordinates by 10 meters, and my y is at 0, and I've used something called a sequence, and I want to set it out 7 times, and each one to be spaced apart by 5 meters. So I know that may not make sense, and I'll show you the relevance of that now. I'm actually going to show you that I have a blank screen on my left hand side here. I'm just going to open up a 3D view, hit run on that, and we can see that's actually created the Revit walls based on the information that I've inputted here. So the information is based on using a sequence. It spaces out 7 times, so across here 7 times. And it spaces out 5 meters at a time. So that's the space between each of these walls. Then it creates something called point by coordinates, 10 meters apart. That's the front and back wall. Line by start point, end point. So it connects all of those lines, pulls them all together, and then using the wall by curve and by height, it creates the actual wall. The next script or tip that I want to show you here is being able to use Dynamo to actually check and count geometry within Revit objects. So if you have high geometry information in your Revit file, you can actually check that by using Dynamo. So here we have an example of 3 doors. We've used a select node, select model elements, select all of these 3 doors. And what we actually want to do is we want to populate each element, each parameter of comments, and we wanted to check if the certain number of faces of the geometry is below or above a certain number. So we want to check here using 60, if the door or the geometry of a particular selected element is above 60, we want to put in a comment called to check because it's too high for what our requirement is. Or if it's below, we wanted to say that it's okay in that it's low geometry and that's the size of the family that we're happy with. So when I actually hit run on this, I'm just going to hit run on this particular script, and you can see that any of the doors have now populated. So this door is below, or this window is below the 60 faces within it, so it's clicked OK. This one is, we can see comments, is actually above 60 faces, so it says to check. And this one as well has actually above 60 faces, so we have to check that as well. And the last and final tip and script that I want to show you is a particular workflow, and it allows you to capture the host of a particular door, which is this wall, and take the fire rating of this wall and populate it into these doors. So we can see here each of the doors has a fire rating parameter, which is now empty, but we know that the particular fire rating of the wall is contained within the type parameter. So we can see here within our fire rating is 2 hours, and we now want to populate our doors which don't have a fire rating in them. So this particular script uses the element get parameter value by name, but it also uses something called element set parameter by name. And all it's doing is pulling in the door information and checking it against its host. So when I hit run, it's ran that particular script, and you can see now these particular doors now have the same fire rating as the wall that they're hosted in. If I select this one, this is a 1 hour wall. Thank you all very much. I'll now take any questions.
Thank you very much, John. Yeah, guys, if you have any questions, please just put them into the Q&A box or the chat. Thanks very much, John. A lot to take in there. I believe there is certain websites or resources that you can possibly get DYN files and Dynamo scripts already written, so you can use them in place. Is that right?
Yeah, the Dynamo forum. It's called the official Dynamo forum. That's very useful, and even if you're having trouble with scripts, people are very quick to get back to you because it's kind of an open source community. People are very helpful, so I definitely recommend that.
Yeah, so thanks for that. Lisa, I hope that answers your question there. Dynamo forum, is that, what website is that? Dynamo forum.
I think dynamobim.forum or something like that. We can double check it.
Yeah,
but it's the official Dynamo forum anyway.
Perfect. We've got a question here. Can you create your own nodes, and how?
You can create your own nodes, and if you know Python or if you know DesignScript, yes, you can create your own nodes, or even a series of nodes. You can create a script that actually becomes one node, if that makes sense. So capturing all room data from Excel, you can turn that into one node as well. So yes, you can.
Okay, great. I hope you guys can hear me now. Sorry about that. Tobias is asking, is there an active link between a Dynamo script and geometry? So for example, in your wall script that you showed, if I change the slider for the 5 meter distance, will the Revit model update? Yes, because I think that's right, because you turned it on to manual. The reason why I didn't update straight away.
Exactly. If I had it set to automatic, it would update straight away. If I change that 5 meters to 7 meters, for example, and then hit run again, it will have rerun with the 7 meter spacing, if that makes sense. I always keep it to manual, just because if you have it to automatic, it can at times crash your Dynamo.
Yeah, and that would have been good for presentation. So David asks, will it be possible to see the scripts fully? It was difficult to follow and understand the blocks for the video. No problem.
Yes, we can definitely send across screenshots of the scripts. You'll be able to follow them along. Yeah,
and also the video will be available for you guys to view at your leisure. We've got Stephen asks, can you link Excel data into Revit family fields? So someone with no Revit experience or does not have a Revit license can populate multiple family fields that someone Revit can import.
Yes, I'm very well, just different to what we showed there in a Revit project. I expect you can do with a Revit family, yes, using that import or export Excel. In
Yeah.
terms of the licensing,
I think that kind of means like somebody who doesn't have Revit, who doesn't have access to Revit at all, can just put some data in Excel, and then that can be imported by somebody who does have
yes,
Revit.
if somebody's only using Excel, yes, that can be as long as your script links into wherever that file is saved, if it's a server location or a central location. Yes.
Perfect. Great. I hope that answers the question, Stephen. Let me know if you were saying something different there. We've got a question from Andrew. Yeah, we can send you the video, Andrew, no problem. Everybody will get a copy of this. The ones that we get published up, we get a copy to the video online. So perfect. So Peter's asked, if you run a script more than once, does it undo the previous run?
That depends on the script itself. You can set an overwrite setting on some scripts. So the Excel file, for example, you can choose if the data gets overwritten again or not, or you can protect it by actually turning off the ability to overwrite data. So for some scripts you can't. It doesn't. Not for every script. So for example, the wall creation, that particular one I showed. You can only run that particular one once, but you can add in other features of it that will allow you to overwrite it. Yes,
it's the nodes, isn't it? So you add in more and more nodes to sort of make that functionality possible, right?
Exactly. It's just an overriding ability. Yeah.
Yeah. What I found was really interesting was how you grouped everything together, so it makes a lot more sense on what you're doing. So the process of the whole the script was very easy to sort of understand, and those groups can be copied and pasted, I believe, as well, in the different scripts if you were to customize anything.
Exactly, and I suppose that's it. Once you create a script, you can reuse it on any project as long as it's relevant. You know, if you're targeting the same parameters or same room data, you know, most scripts are reusable or with some minor customization for other projects. Yes.
Perfect. Just a few more questions there. So Tom asked, that last example, you getting a parameter value by name looks like it could be used to get electrical power rating from an equipment family and send it to a power outlet. That's interesting.
Yeah, that sounds very straightforward, very similar to that last one that we saw. You'd just be pulling in two separate categories, I'd imagine, from that information. Yeah.
Perfect. So I've also just got a nice question, which I thought was quite interesting to sort of talk about when to use Dynamo and when not to use Dynamo. So coming from a Revit architectural perspective, mainly, when would you feel like to use Dynamo to make sure that you're using it? And when does it feel like it's doing too much of a job, or you can just literally just carry on as you were?
Yeah, and that's a very good question, because it does sometimes Dynamo just isn't the most efficient tool for that particular task you're looking to do. You know, when saying that, Dynamo can do quite a lot of things, and I suppose that only comes from learning by doing. If you feel something, you know, if you're putting time in to create a script, and if it's only being used for one simple task, you know, would it have been better to do it manually? So it's kind of it's a learn by doing attitude. But if it's a script you're creating is taking time, you can reuse it across your whole design company, then that's probably time well spent. So you kind of just have to look on you know, what is your return on the amount of time that you're spending on it.
Yeah, and I think the idea about the way we said automating tasks. So you don't want to keep doing repetitive tasks, and that's where it comes in handy. So making sure that you're not doing a task more than once.
Exactly, and that knowledge will come from starting at the basic stuff, you know, so doing the Excel transfer of information or creating levels from an Excel sheet, doing very basic things like that will actually trigger ideas like, oh, maybe I could then try this in Revit, and you'll start to build up your experience in that way.
Yeah, perfect. So just one more question. I think I'll probably cut it there. We've just got something. Dynamo environment looks like it has a 3D view. So does it actually give you the opportunity to design something on there?
So yes, you can visualize Revit geometry in the background of Dynamo. Now, visually, it's fairly plain looking. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't give you as much depth. Like, it doesn't have edge lines on your geometry and stuff like that. But as soon as you hit run, because they're directly connected, it's going to have the same effect. So if you want to design something in Revit or in Dynamo, it's still the same process, if that makes sense.
Perfect. So what I'm going to do is, I think the other questions that we've got here, I'm just going to say that we'll probably leave those questions for now. We'll give you an answer by email. So please don't worry. We'll go back to you by emails as well. Any other questions you do have, please let us know and we'll let you know by email. Myself and Jonathan will be able to help you there. I think we'll probably leave it there. Thanks very much for your input on that, Jonathan. Future events, I just want to bring you attention to what we are running in the future. In terms of this, we'll look out for our emails to register on these webinars. We're running another one on July the 7th at 11 o'clock. Top 10 tips for Autodesk AC Collection, getting started with Revit. So again, John will be helping us go through this, setting up Revit for your first project. So covering stuff like Revit coordinate systems, 2D floor plans, placing sheets, linking in CAD files, tidying up your 3D views, creating quantity schedules. We'll be trying to go through that, the best ways to do that. And what I'll do is just in this chat, I'll send over a link to all you guys. If you want to register now, I mean, you will get an email about it as well. Thanks very much. Sorry if I haven't answered your questions. We'll get back to you by email, and you will get a recording of this sent out to you shortly once we upload it online, and so you can have a look at the Dynamo nodes as well. Perfect. Anything else you want to add to that, Jonathan?
No, just thank you everybody for attending, and yeah, we'll get back to you by email and send you screenshots to help you get started.
Perfect. Great. All right, guys, stay safe and enjoy the nice weather when it gets good weather. And yep, so take care. I hope to see you the next one. Thanks very much. Goodbye now.
Thank you.